Hello, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond. My name is Taylor, and welcome to the art table for September 2024, this time featuring Let Me Die a Saint, or Saint as I will be referring to him. Now, Saint does a ton of digital work that ranges in terms of application from, chalky, textured black and white images to some incredible 3D models of various objects and people. Unfortunately, I do not know if he is open for commissions, as it wasn't very clear necessarily, but he has been very open with his communication, which has been awesome. So feel free to use the links in the description down below to get a hold of him. I cannot speak as to whether he does commissions. He does not have a commission page, so I think it might be a case-by-case basis if he does them. So by all means, feel free to contact him. If nothing else, check out the links down below, and let's get into the disclaimer. So to get the usual disclaimer out of the way, I do not take any sort of kickback, promotion, discount, commission, payment, or anything of the sort in relation to these videos. I do this purely for the love of the artwork. If I have had a commission done by the artist, I will let you know. If I do not mention it, then that means I have not had a commission done by them. All commission prices, timing, everything like that is set by the artist. Any deals you make are between you and them. I am in no way involved, cannot get you a discount, cannot get anything sped up, and cannot get you in contact with them. That is purely up to you. They have every right to refuse, every right to set the time frame they feel is appropriate, and the price they feel is appropriate. Please do not share their artwork without their permission. I have written permission from every artist that I feature here on the channel, and please do not share my video without the appropriate watermarks and the appropriate disclaimer, because I am sharing someone else's work with their permission for me to share it, not for you. With all that being said, let's get into the video. Alright, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's, get into his pieces. So I wanted to start off with this first one, actually first two technically, because they're a great reflection of Saint's abilities and just kind of the approach that he takes with these things. Both of them are very detailed. You can see the small changes of the color version when compared to the black and white gray version. I'm not quite sure what to call it there. Now, I really liked this pairing because there's such a noticeable difference between them, and not just in the fact that one has color and one is more black and gray, but the black and gray version seems so much more desolate, almost abandoned, whereas the colored version is so full of life and energy with the lights on and activity bustling around the area. The other thing I noticed is, about their dichotomy, is that either one of them could have come first. It could have been this ancient ruin that was then found and used by a new generation, or it could have been another abandoned historical site which was left for some unknown reason. I choose to believe it's the former, personally. This was kind of a special underground historical site that was taken over by some rich, very paranoid secret society. They could all see the direction that Earth was heading in, so they scoured the Earth to find somewhere safe to live should danger arise. They did not want to build their own bunkers, but renovate existing structures as it would be less conspicuous, and this seemingly underground temple was the perfect solution. There, they could create their own societies and one day move back to the surface, not to rule, but to cultivate it once more and bring the Earth back to prosperity. Now, in terms of actual, technical design, I really liked the streaks and the small touches in the color version, which gives it a more painter's canvas feeling. Whereas the first one comes across more like a pencil sketch, an idea, a concept. He could have simply colored it in and called it a day, but he chose to take that extra step and give it so much more dimension. Speaking of dimensions, let's move up one. So I grabbed this one because, again, he does some fantastic 3D modeling, and honestly, it always blows my mind when something is made in 3D because of the additional work it takes. So this crank rotary phone was certainly a sight to behold, and not just from a historical standpoint, but also because it was rendered so well in a three-dimensional space. Now, I can't imagine the amount of work that goes into something like this, because you have to meticulously model and plan out each small detail in that extra dimension, and ensure that everything looks pleasing to the eye still. There's also a lot more consideration when it comes to the finer details, such as the gold decal on the side, and the texture of the rubber versus the wooden portions, and the shiny brass tubing in the back. you have to think about the way that the light's going to reflect off of it, how it's going to show off of it, and where those shadows should be, again, in that third dimension, in that more complex space. And then how would that change shading and color with regards to all that. Now, I understand that this phone is much more steampunk-esque than the real one would have been, but it's still absolutely gorgeous. I imagine that this would have been used in some turn-of-the-century office that deals specifically in special operations, and whoever's picking up that phone is going to have a lot of blood on their hands very soon. And I'm always amazed by any artwork, but the time commitment required to make something 3D is beyond my comprehension, and I genuinely applaud Saint's ability to do this, as well as all the other works that I've shown from him and the other artists. Speaking of having blood on their hands, though, I chose this next one, which depicts what I believe to be Riddick and maybe his son or a younger version of himself. I wasn't entirely sure about that one. But they're very well done and feature almost a brushstroke style appearance, as though they were deliberately painted with the searing hatred in their eyes and the blades in their hands, ready to fight for their life if necessary. To this day, I believe that Riddick is one of Vin Diesel's best roles, and that the game had a lot to do with that, which did, kind of encourage me to select this work. Another aspect that drew me in was the lighting, depicted for both characters, because you can see the massive differences depending on where the lighting is, and how minimal the kind of outlining and surrounding light is, just to really kind of highlight their contours and the way that their different bodies are shaped. Moving on, this portrait seemed interesting partly because of the expression that he chose to depict. I'm not sure if this was an existing character or an original creation from Saint, but normally when I think of a portrait, I think of someone, either smiling or happy or having this expressionless, stoic look on their face. Not one with such venom in her stare, especially in the unique eye color, and that being, the light crimson rose that becomes so much more saturated in the shade. I also appreciate the small splashes of color between her eyes and the hairband mixed with the two small hair clips. They are great accents that allow the piece to really hold that same sense of anger and disdain without taking away from that feeling, taking away from those emotions, and, giving, again, that just splash of color, the just additional little touch. I also think it was interesting to make it look like she was always there, but only exposed when the brush was taken across the canvas. It almost implies that she would not exist without the person who is perceiving her, painting her, making her who she is, and she doesn't seem to enjoy the idea of her existence. Maybe she's angry and vengeful with the person she's looking at, maybe she hates her very existence and only seeks to remove the person who brought her into this world. We'll never know. Speaking of kind of bringing someone to life, this piece might be my favorite, and I will fully admit I may be reading too much into this. I don't want to speak to anyone's political views or personal views outside of my own, so I am not trying to make commentary or say that Saint was trying to send a message, but this is the message that I personally pull from it, so please don't attribute my views to his or any other artists that I feature on the channel. So I am unsure if this piece was finished, but I'm kind of assuming that it is because it sends a very powerful message about the military and the humanity that it takes away from its soldiers. Soldiers are almost always depicted and expected to wear the same gear, the same uniform, usually carry the same or similar weapons, with some small variations in modern day for utility purposes. Still, the idea is that they all look the same and form this sense of cohesion, but somewhere along the way, people lose their individuality. The only thing different about them is their faces, and Saint has depicted this beautifully. The two men look almost the same in terms of their outfits and their weapons. Of course, they don't have that many details because they're just another cog in the machine. We must remember that these are real people. Real in air quotes in this case. Following their orders and committing these actions. They all have their own hopes, goals, and aspirations in life. To me, this is why only the faces have any definition to them, to show that these two men are different. They are not simple, mindless shells. I feel like the shorter one on the right is actually the commanding officer, and the one on the left is of his unit, who treats him more like a friend than his CO. And despite the looks of them, they have a good relationship and will happily share a drink at the bar. The CO has a family back home, At least he used to. And the other guy has a partner back home who's pregnant. They share their families, stories, histories, and personalities just days before they're shipped out to the front lines. Neither of them would return. They would just ordain a wall filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of other names that held no soul. They would be lost in a sea of other names, stories, histories, and families, to be remembered only by those closest to them. All of this is beautifully rendered in pencil sketch strikes and have been beautifully shaded to really depict those detailed portions. We only begin to see these soldiers as people when we look them in the eye, when we look at their faces and see just how different they are. What was their story, and who is left to tell it? Let's go to something a little lighter. So, thank you, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I do hope you've enjoyed Saint's work so far. We are at the halfway point, meaning we have a few more pieces left to go. By all means, please check out their social medias. Feel free to hit them up for a commission, potentially. Again, that is fully within their hands. He will tell you if he is comfortable with it or not, and he will set pricing with you. With that being said, I promise the back half, so to speak, is a little lighter than this last piece was. So I wanted to showcase this almost priest-like character because it struck me as very interesting. There's a clear humanoid shape, but then they have the 6 eyes on the mask at least. Maybe not in person, who knows. And I think a tail, as far as I could tell. We also technically do not know what is hiding beneath the robes, so they may have a less humanoid figure than what it seems. I also grabbed it because it seems to tie in, thematically at the very least, with, kind of ancient Aztec or Mayan civilizations, much like the first images that I showed in the video. Now, I would personally imagine that these were some of the original inhabitants of kind of that first pyramids, ruins type of area, and that they were the ones who built the structures themselves, and that for some reason they slowly died out and their society began to wither. I also really like the color scheme because it entices a lot of questions from the viewer, such as, what is this creature? What, does their lower half look like? And most of all, what does the rest of their face look like? Saint has taken an interesting avenue of covering most of the head and, leaves just enough to entice the viewer. The fact that the jaw is a much more reddish color, I wonder if it's a rash, a birthmark, maybe some ceremonial paint or makeup, or if it's a scar. Or if this is just genuinely their skin color. There have been numerous cultures that make their religious figures go through some sort of trial or bear some sort of scar to prove their devotion. Is this an example of that, or is this unique to this individual person? I also can't help but notice the circular mark on the right shoulder. The same image appears to kind of come up in a lot of Saints' works, so I don't know if this is a trademark or if it's something very personal to them, but I did want to highlight it and just kind of point out, I don't know what it is. So I grabbed this piece because it has such intricate and delicate details and was really interesting. I've never seen anything quite like it. I'm not sure of any context for this kind of futuristic helmet, device, or setup. I'm not even sure what to call it. They are clearly unamused by their position, and they have mostly disconnected from the larger device because there are some loose tubes at the back end, but still that kind of one main connector. They're clearly signs of golden symbols, something commonly associated with divinity, so maybe this was an angel, or this is what angels actually look like. Maybe they're all people just connected with these special helmets. I won't lie, I also created an association in my head between this and the color scheme of the Pokemon god Arceus. Now, I don't believe that this was the intention behind it, but the associations from a design standpoint are certainly there. I also have this feeling this is what's secretly in the temple that was depicted in the first image. This is the all-knowing being at the top of the temple, filled with the knowledge of all humankind and the beings that will take their species off the earth. This may be why the ruins were left behind, undamaged but simply abandoned, because they were no longer needed and simply left behind. Now, keeping with that kind of spiritual imagery, I wanted to come back to the world of 3D with this one. Now, I understand that it is a little bit dark, but Saint has made the decision intentionally, so I will not comment on that further. This is a statue, as far as I can tell, that depicts the god Anubis, or something very similar. Now, it could be another humanoid dog entity, so I don't want to just automatically assume this is Anubis, but it, again, gave off very similar vibes. And I love the small details and want to reiterate that all of this work would go into creating such a complex model is never easy, especially one that's kind of bending or twisting in some way, because that pulls the muscles in different ways, and you need to depict that movement, that strain. Where is it going? How does it contour? Saints also made a very interesting decision by having two different lighting sources. The more whitish light from the top of the screen, and then the really reddish light near the left backside. It creates a much more ominous feeling, especially when it's combined with either the tail or odd tendril that's coming up from near the bottom of the statue. I also really like how the model looks like it was made out of some smoother clay. The basic textures are there, and though they don't have like streak marks of real clay, they still all give off that same feeling, that same impression. Speaking of impressions, this one left quite an impression on me when I saw it. The miscellaneous lines and the way they overlap made it almost feel like it was made of chalk or even charcoal. It was a great depiction of black and white, highlighting all of the significant details that really outline the face and give it definition. This man seems like a traveler, one who has seen many sights of the world, sat in many homes, and shaken hands of people from all walks of life. He journeys onward ever for more knowledge, to meet all the people of the earth, to hear their stories, to collect them, and possibly share them with the rest of the world. I really like the natural feeling lines in his hair and his cloak, scarf thing. It might be a hoodie, I can't quite tell. They feel as though they were drawn with, again, chalk or charcoal, especially with the background having that rougher, less processed feeling. It kind of creates this feeling that this man is traveling on foot as far as the winds will take him. He also features the circle, which is either a birthmark or a tattoo on his face, and I have mentioned this before that I'm not quite sure what the meaning is, but I would imagine it's something significant for Saint, so I don't want to dive too deeply into that. And I did want to conclude with these two images because they were my first exposure to Saint's work and something that really gripped me. Maybe it was the forearms, but combined with the fact that he was wielding two swords that were seemingly uniquely designed for him, it was very interesting. I never thought of a sword with effectively a double-length hilt that also had double guards to create a place for each hand to fit simultaneously, given that he's got 4 of them. It brings to mind games like Elden Ring and other Souls-likes, where the bosses wield massive weapons and move in very fluid, hypnotic ways. I would love to see this character in motion, just to see how it would bend and twist and move. His body seemed mangled and torn, probably from countless battles against difficult opponents, but for whatever reason, he pressed on. He would fight, soaked in blood, until the day that he would achieve his goals, whatever those goals may be. This feels like a piece where he's placed all his passion and he poured his soul into the image with all he had. I felt like it was very fitting for this to be the final piece of today's showcase. And with all that being said, thank you, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, so much for being here, so much for listening to me talk about Saint's work. I do hope you appreciate it. I do hope you reach out to Saint on his social medias, give him props, give him love, give him joy, and if he's up for it, give him a commission if you can afford it. With that being said, thank you once again for being here. If there's an artist you want me to cover, please do let me know. I do have artists lined up for the rest of 2024, but I am eagerly looking for ones to cover in 2025. Please send me their contact info, and I promise I will reach out to them. Whether or not they respond is, well, up to them. Alright, I will see you all in the next one.